Good afternoon, and yeah, let's talk a little bit on how to automate the deployment on for Business Central SaaS environment. So, to make everything clear, obviously we will not be talking about on-prem this time, but anything SaaS. Before we go in to the topic. I always start with some housekeeping. First of all, I'm Erik Wouters, or Waldo. I have a blog. I've been working on a lot of DevOps lately, and together with Bart and Ifacto, we have been working a lot on ALOps as well. And given you are attending this session, I might figure that you already heard about ALOps as well. Now, first of all, I will be doing the session. Bart will be the moderator. If you have questions, well, there is no audio for you in this webinar, but you are able to get to Bart and ask basically anything you like. Yeah, if you have questions, please ask him. He's available throughout the session. After the session, this will be recorded and it will be made available to YouTube. Now there's already some sessions on YouTube. Let me show you briefly. So we have a channel on YouTube. The 2 sessions that we already did are on there. And just to give you a small tip of each session, and I will not play this, does have kind of like, let's say, a menu for you to easily browse through the video. Because I'm touching multiple topics basically every webinar that I do, and it makes it easier for you to navigate to a specific topic. Like this one also has some all the scenarios that I cover in terms of dependencies and stuff like that, or specifically on how to handle versions in your app, and so on and so on. Yeah, so the session that we are doing today will also end up here on this channel. Together with that, I always make the demos that I touch available on the public DevOps project as well. If I will take the second as an example, for instance, you are able to access this project on DevOps as well. Just let me show you that briefly. I will use an in private browser so you see the same as I do now. So this project, that's basically the session that we did last time. You're able to access almost any details that I've set up there. So, for instance, the repositories that I've been using. Yeah, there were 4 scenarios that webinar. So you see the 4 scenarios and the apps for the 4 scenarios that I used. Every single app obviously has got its own YAML file, which I'll be talking about. You can see those as well, learn from it, and even the running pipelines, or at least the ones that I ran at that point. You can view them as well and even go into the details of a certain pipeline and even a detail of a certain step within the pipeline. So yeah, there is a lot of details for you that you can see, and what I will be showing today is already available in the public URL as well, being the bottom one. And as said, today we will be talking about SaaS deployment. Now, obviously, when we talk about SaaS or Business Central SaaS, we talk about the one that Microsoft is putting in the cloud, and we are able to access it from the cloud. So anything businesscentral.dynamics.com. I have an example here, businesscentral.dynamics.com. This is basically a tenant that I have. a demo that I tend to use quite a lot. So I'm obviously able to go into some kind of administration panel, let's say, to admin all my environments that I have. And the idea is when you have development for a certain tenant, let's say I want to do development for this tenant, I probably will have multiple environments, a dev environment, a test environment, a production environment, to at least one of all of these. And yeah, how do I deploy to it? How do I deploy an app to it? First of all, deployment from VS Code. The F5 key is obviously something you can do for a dev environment, for development and for ongoing development, but this is not how you should deploy to any kind of test or a user environment, or definitely not for a production environment. So we will use different tools for that. So how do we do that? Well, let me first browse through how we would manually upload, let's say, an app in production or any kind of tenant. Just imagine you decompiled an app, you had some kind of development environment, maybe a Docker environment, or maybe a dev environment as a separate environment in Business Central SaaS. Doesn't really matter. What you had as an end result is some kind of app file. So I've got here 2 app files, which is the result of a compile. Yeah. So the way on manually uploading that in the cloud is quite simple. Let's go back to some kind of environment. I will go to my dev environment in this case. What you could do is you can go to your extension management page and upload an extension. Choose the extension, and I will choose the base extension. I previously already did the Fin extension. Now, if you remember from the previous webinar where I showed the dependencies between extensions, the Fin extension, this is the one that I actually developed at that point, is dependent from the base extension. So you can already imagine if I would upload only the Fin extension, something will go wrong, right? Because the base extension is not there yet. At this point, I will just upload the base extension. I will accept the disclaimer and deploy. Now, what is happening? The app is being uploaded in some kind of table in Business Central, and in the background, Business Central will get that app and install that. So we can see the deployment status. So in what status are we at the moment? And now you will see what I meant. Like I previously uploaded the Fin app before I uploaded the base app. This is actually in progress. That's what I just did. But what I did like 10 minutes ago is I uploaded the Fin app, and obviously that failed. So if something would fail, this is the page to keep track of the progress. Okay. And if something would fail, this is also the page where you can get more information on what has failed. It could be different things. It could be your code is not really cloud ready, let's say. It could be, in this case, my dependency that was not correct. So always look at the details and find out why it is that your app was not able to deploy. If I would refresh here, this can take a few minutes, but at some point, this would either say failed or completed. And if it says obviously completed, then you might expect that your app is among all these apps here. Like mine is actually already here. So let me go back to the deployment status. It's still in progress. Well, I believe you, it's probably still in progress. We are not going to wait for it, but at some point the app is being. And if you can do this in kind of sandbox environment, you can do that in a production environment as well. But you can hopefully also see that in the world of multiple apps, and definitely in multiple dependent apps, this is actually quite a lengthy process to go through. And this is absolutely not something that is automated. Yeah, I would not like to do this for a multitude of customers with a multitude of apps, with a multitude of versions of apps, and then with a multitude of dependencies. I mean, you can imagine that this will become quite complex. So automation is key. Let me quickly check the deployment status. And now you see here that it is completed. So now I can be sure, okay, my base app is part of my environment. The FinApp is still failed. What I could do is re-upload it, but I see here the FinApp is already here, but not installed because it failed previous time. I can try to, no, I probably need to, yeah, well, try to install it again. Let's see. Successfully installed now, obviously because the base app is installed as well. So all is fine now. Okay. What I would like to show you is actually something that I'm working on with the company, and actually a lot of people are working on. And this is actually a multitude of apps. All of this is one single app. So the app and the test app, an app and the test app. And so you see the base app, sales purge apps, fin app, logistics, and so on and so on. And this is actually a product we are working on with quite a big amount of dependencies. And hopefully you can already imagine that having to deploy a structure or an architecture like this is something you do not want to do manually. Yeah. So how do we automate? How to deploy to SaaS automatically? Well, there is something that's called the Business Central Automation API. It's been there for quite a while, and is actually to automate a number of tasks we can do within Business Central SaaS. Like creating company, like user management, like permission management, all these kind of things. Probably when you create a new environment, these things need to be set up first before one of your customers or users will be able to access and decently use that environment. And having to set that up, like data import, like setup packages, these things, just creating a company, users and access for users. You probably want to automate that, especially when you sell like 10,000 users every day, right? One of the things that obviously is also automatable and should be automatable is the fact that you need to upload extensions. Right now, this automation API is fully described on docs, and I obviously would like can only how do you say that in English? You should read this. Sorry. And also for handling the extensions, there are API and API calls we could do to handle our extensions, which means import extensions or upload extensions, checking the deployment status, and removing extensions as well. Yeah, and that is obviously in any kind of automation scenario something we would like to look into. But before we can look into that, there are some considerations that we need to make in terms of authentication. Now, I'm not going to say I'm an authentication guru, as totally not. I got good people in my company that actually understands what I will be talking about in the next few minutes. But let's just give you an overview on what I know that is going to challenge us a little bit in terms of authentication. First of all, what I see that the community likes to work with basic authentication. Now, basic authentication, the conclusion that we need to make there at this point is it might work. Anything old will work. Anything new, what I was told, will not work anymore with basic authentication. That's why I'm saying it might work. And it's clear that Microsoft obviously wants to get rid of basic authentication because it's actually quite less secure than OAuth. And it also is a big way around multi-factor authentication, but in a way, basic authentication might still work. Now, I got a demo here on the automation API, and you will see that I am using basic authentication. Yeah. Now, this is just a simple REST client in VS Code that I tend to use always to figure out how would I be able to use some kind of API call. I'm not going to go too deep into this one, but as you can see, with a simple basic authentication call, I can get to all the APIs that are available, including the extension upload and so on. So with, let me get my companies, and with a simple request, I would be able to get to the apps that I had been uploading previously, for instance, in my dev environment of my tenant. So yes, I can use API, this automation API with basic authentication, but do know that at some point it might just not work anymore. And we all know Microsoft is abandoning this. At some point, this will not work anymore. Yeah. Maybe it's interesting to briefly show you what I did to make this work, and that is actually quite easy. Just go to your users and just provide the web service access key. And this is actually the authentication I will use. This key with my user, and basically that's what I'm using as basic authentication. That's all. Okay, but for the secure setup, let's not do that. Let's try to set everything up with OAuth. Now, this works, and there is a lot to say about OAuth. It's quite complex, and again, I'm not the guru. I just can share what I know. This will probably change in the near future, or maybe in the far future as well. This is not a real service-to-service authentication that I will be using. What I know at this point, the grant type password is the one that we will need to use. So I will say a few words more about that in a minute. But do know, when you combine everything basically with multi-factor authentication, that doesn't work yet. That's the current status. So if you have one protocol or enable for all your users the multi-factor authentication, basically you have a problem with automating the deployment from DevOps to Business Central. Other than using still basic authentication, obviously. If that still works, then you're still fine. Okay, that's the considerations you need to take into account. As said, for OAuth, we will use the password grant. So this is basically what we use for authenticating. Using the password grant basically means that you will need to allow your application to use a username and password that has access to enough access to basically upload an extension. What was I saying? Basically, what it will use is it needs to be able to use a Business Central account to know if it has a license or not, to be able to do what it needs to do. In our terms, uploading an extension, and it needs to grant that access to some kind of application. In our case, DevOps. Yeah. So what basically this says, I need a username password from Business Central, and I need a client ID and client secret that I need to create in Azure to be able to use this grant type to create a token to use against an API call for Business Central. I hope that makes sense a little bit. To do that, actually, Vieco created quite a good blog post that we tend to use as step-by-step guidance through this. But let me step-by-step guide you a little bit through that. if I'm able to open the right Azure portal. Okay, I'm not going to open this one. Sorry, that was the private mode. I will open this one. So the idea is I will grant my app, being DevOps, being ALOps basically, I will grant that app access to Business Central. So how to do that? In Azure Active Directory, I will go to app registrations and I will create a new registration. So I will just call it DevOps. You can call it ALOps, let's say, and it needs to, and I will copy paste this, access Business Central through this URL. Okay, so this is step number one. I'll just create a new app registration. And what you actually now did is create a new client ID. This ID will identify my app wherever I use this app, this ID in my app. Yeah, you will see me using this in DevOps in a few minutes. And to a tenant. Obviously, this tenant is the tenant that I will be using. Now, this is the same tenant as my Azure Active Directory, which also the same tenant that I'm using for Business Central. Yeah. Now that we set this up, we basically need to add a few things more. First of all, what we need to be able to do is use the grant type password, which basically means I need to create a token. So I need to make sure that I can create access tokens. So I will enable access tokens and ID tokens here. Next, I will need a secret, a client secret. That's basically what I showed earlier in that piece of PowerShell. So I will create a new secret. I will give it a name. It's again ALOps. And there you go. Do remember to copy the secret right away. That's why I always have a notepad open. This is my client secret, because when you refresh this page, the secret will never be shown again. And basically what you should do is create yet another secret to be able to use as the client secret in your application. Last, but definitely not least, I need to give some more permissions. I basically need to give permissions to the app, to any app that will be using this registration, to impersonate my account and use that account in Business Central. So I will add that permission, and you see here that Business Central is among them. I will add delegated permission to impersonate the users that I will be adding to my the request for the token. There we go. Do not forget to, if you are an admin, it's easy. Just click this one and then you will grant access. If you're not an admin, probably it will send an email to the admin to grant permissions to actually grant this, what you just changed as an API permissions. Okay, so if you see this, it's granted, it's fine, everything is set up. So the details that I will need, and maybe I can show that one slide again. So the details that I will need is a client ID, a client secret, a username, and a password. Username, password, these are from Business Central. That will be used. That will be impersonated, let's say. And client ID secret is to identify my app and to that I just granted access and so on. So let me save those details. I already have the client secret here, but I also need the client ID and username, password, and obviously also the tenant ID. Okay, in the overview of my app registration, I can have the client ID here. So I will copy that. I will copy this to my notepad, and if it is convenient, I will just copy the tenant ID from here as well. Okay, so this is tenant, client ID and the client secret. All right, that's it. That's all actually I need to set up on the level of Azure Active Directory. Now, in terms of ALOps, or at least to be able to publish to SaaS, in ALOps, we have set up a few tasks that helps us do that. Now, let's navigate first to the marketplace where you can get ALOps. How you can get ALOps is already explained in one of the previous webinars. If you just search for SaaS here, you will see that there are a few steps. The ALOps SaaS get extensions and the ALOps SaaS publish extension with the entire documentation basically on how to use that step. So these two steps will make sure that you are able to publish to Business Central. So how do we use that in DevOps? Well, let me switch to DevOps. So what I did, I set up a release pipeline, and let me run through that. You can see here that it works, yeah. And the idea is to whatever I have been building in my build pipelines, I will release to the test environment and maybe the production environment. Okay, so let me go into how I created this pipeline. As I already explained in the previous video, what you first define are artifacts to deploy, and next the stages where you would like to deploy to. Yeah. So the artifacts, that is simply again the base app and the fin app, and you will see here the base app comes from the build pipeline base. You can see that build pipeline here. It's the base pipeline, and you will see I just have one run at this moment, and this has two artifacts: an app and a test app. Yeah. So the actual app that I would like to deploy is obviously the actual app, not the test app. But we'll go into that in a minute. The same for the fin app. You see, I've got a fin pipeline, and yeah, I can show that here. It's the fin pipeline. That one I've run twice apparently, and also that pipeline also has artifacts. And again, an app and a test app. So the idea is that I will be able to publish both of them. So let me go back to my release. So I assembled my my apps, and now I would like to release them to the test environment. Remember, my admin central had a QA environment. Okay, so this is the environment I would like to release my apps to from an automated release pipeline. Now, the way I set that up is with 3 tasks. So let's go into the tasks. You see here, obviously I still need an agent. I'm reusing the agent pool that I created earlier, the Waldo agent pool. Yeah. So this is again just a built agent that is able to execute PowerShell. Yeah. And this PowerShell, you can already guess, is going to call API calls. Yeah. It's going to get the app files from the artifacts and through an API call, upload that to Business Central. Okay, if you add some kind of step here, you see I already have 3 steps. If you just search for SaaS, you will see the 2 steps that I talked about from the marketplace page. We've got the get extensions, and we've got the publish extensions, and I used both of them. Now the get extension is very simply, it will show you the current situation of Business Central SaaS. So it will get all the extensions. I'll just show you these are the extensions that are installed. And this is the output of the deployment statuses. Yeah. Always a very interesting. We always put that as a first step to just show us the current situation. If there is something wrong, then at least we have an overview of the current situation of all the apps. The other step is publish extension, and you can already guess what that does. Now, if you add that, one of these, I just add that, it needs my attention, obviously, because I need to fill in some parameters. Now, the endpoint and the version is already set up by default and is usually okay. But here you see the details that I need for my grant type password. I need to have my ID and my secret. I need to have my Business Central user and password. Okay, with this, I will be able to create a token, which will be used to do the actual call. Okay, I will remove this and we'll go into how I set that up. Now you can already see these are all quite secrets, and I didn't just put them into the pipeline. But what I did, I used variables. Anything that you see dollar with parentheses, that are variables. And in this case, what I did, I created not pipeline variables, but I used variable groups. So I've got one variable group secret that basically I put everything in. So let me show you that specific part. You see here I've got the secrets part, and you see here all the variables that I need. The username, password in Business Central, but also the client ID, the client secret, and the tenant ID. Now we just created that. That's why I put it in the notepad. So what I would highly suggest is that you actually also use that as secrets, as secret variables, let's say, in a variable group. So I prepared that a little bit. I got this secrets 2 here, where I already put my license and username password. And you see here the password, or it's not actually all stars, but that means it's a secret. So yeah, I cannot read it anymore. So let me show you how you can do that. It's very simple. So to provide the client ID, secret, and a tenant, this was a tenant, right? So you simply copy that to as a value. And what you do is you make it a secret. From now on, nobody, whoever reads the content of this variable group or output in your DevOps pipeline, it will never show the value of this variable, while DevOps then is still able to use the content. So we do that for every part. This was my secret. And now I basically set up a variable group being called secrets2. Yeah, let me save that. What you might have seen in my release pipeline, yeah, I could have done it here. I'm using secrets, not secrets2. So if I would like to switch to my new variable group, I would be able to just unlink this variable group and link the secrets2 variable group. From now on, I'm able to use these variables. Now I named them the same, so I can easily switch between the two variable groups. So now the content, actually my new setup that I just did in Azure, this app registration will be used with this client ID and this secret. Okay. Okay. Let me not leave yet. Let me see. What is this? No, I want to leave here. In any case, let me go back to my releases. So that is actually what I've been using here. Okay. Where am I? So I've been using these variables, the ones that I linked in the variable group, and that's what I have not saved. So let me just unlink them again, link my secrets2, and save it. Yes, go back to my pipeline. So tenant ID, client ID, my user password, and not unimportant also the environment. So this makes sure that I will be deploying to my QA environment. And you can already guess, in my pipeline, I also had the production. And it's kind of like the same, but in this case, I will be deploying to the production environment. Okay, let me go back to QA, but because there was one detail left to say, which is the app filter. Remember that I always had 2 apps in my artifacts. And as a deployment, I would only like to deploy 1 app. It's the actual app. I do not want to deploy the test app in my scenario to the test environment, or definitely not the production environment. So I need to be able to create a decent filter. Now in ALOps, what we have foreseen is the ability to give some kind of suffix to an app file name. So if you see in the build pipelines, I will just edit one of the pipelines. In that YAML, when we compile an app, like in this step, when we compile an app, we will, this ALOps compiler will automatically upload that as an artifact. And as you see here, this parameter will add _app as a last, as basically at the end of the file name. Yeah, and it will do the same for the test app. So all I need to do is now use this suffix in my release pipeline. And that's why the _app.app is here. And obviously also the actual app, because I want to make sure that I deploy the base app first, and then the fin app, which is very similar. It's a very similar filter. Yeah. So that's it. From the moment this is done, what I would do is simply test it. And if it works, do know there is a clone button here. Yeah. So if you would like to have, like in this case, also have another stage, but a different environment, simply clone it. And you could see the same steps, even the same agent. Yeah. And in this case, you would be able to clone it to some kind of other environment, whatever you have as a sandbox or a production environment. Yeah. All right, but we will not do that. Okay, so let me create, a release. What this will do now, hopefully, we can just watch what is going on. Let's see the progress. So the first step, obviously, for a release pipeline is to download the artifacts. Do see when it's downloading the artifacts, it's actually downloading the test and the normal app. So that's why I needed to make sure that I was able to filter that app. So here you see that my secrets2 variable group is working because I was able to get the state of my extensions. As you see in the QA environment, I already have a Waldo app base and the Waldo app fin. And these are the deployment statuses. And to help you, you can always see the actual API call that we are using. Yeah, so the API call for getting the extensions and the API call for getting the deployment status. Now you see here that is trying to deploy the base app. You can see that the app that it was able to resolve from my filter, it was the actual app that I do want to publish at this point. So that's a good thing. And further on now, it's basically just waiting. It's going to call this deployment status every some seconds to check if the deployment was a success or not. And if it noticed it was a success, it will continue the pipeline you see here. And this is how it is now automatically uploading apps. And you can already imagine there is not a single thing I need to do about this. How I have set this up even. If you go to the edit, you see there is some kind of check mark here in this lightning bolt. This is actually what we call continuous deployment. So continuously from whenever I have a successful build for this pipeline, for the FinApp, I will automatically start this deployment process. I will create a release and automatically it will be deployed to the QA environment. And even more, you can see some check marks here as well. And this is actually the pre-deployment scenarios. So what I enabled is a pre-deployment approval. So I would like to approve, not would like, I need to approve first before it will be deployed to production environment. And I need to do that because I'm the approver. If you do this, do not forget to select deploy latest and cancel the others. Else, just because if you have continuous deployment, you need to deploy every single one of them in sequence. And when you enable this one, you kind of like avoid having to do that in sequence. Okay. Let me check what the status is. You see here now that it was successfully deployed. Remember that we now are using the actual things that I set up here in this app registration. Yeah. So this is the client secret and the client ID that I'm using at the moment. And if you go to the release itself, because of this pre-deployment approval, I've got this approve step. So what I would be able to do now is test it myself in the QA sandbox, and then move to basically just click approve, and then it's registered that I did the approval, and now it's basically just deploying the same things, same apps. You see the version of the apps to the production environment. Okay. All right. That is kind of like it to deploy to SaaS with ALOps. Okay, a few words on multi-factor authentication. At this point in my environment, I did not enable multi-factor authentication, and I do know that CSPs are actually mandatory to enable multi-factor authentication. That is at this point kind of like a problem. You see here, and I can basically browse to that specific occasion. So you see here that things started to fail. Well, this started to fail from the moment I enabled multi-factor authentication for this environment. Now, this is a completely different environment. I think I can show you. I don't think I can show you, but that's the environment on a demo sandbox, not the one that I was using. I opened that here. So to enable multi-factor authentication is quite easy. Basically, you go to Azure Active Directory, you go to your users, and then you go to the multi-factor authentication tab. And for the user, you can basically just enforce multi-factor authentication like I did recently for this user, which was the one user that I was using in this pipeline. Yeah. Maybe I can show you that as well. The admin user is not here in the library, is the one that I'm using here. So yeah, I enabled multi-factor authentication of that one and things started to fail. Well, I don't see a way around that for at this point. And obviously when you do have a way around that, I would definitely like to know. So as a conclusion for multi-factor authentication, if that is mandatory, the only way I see is to have some kind of different user where you do not enable multi-factor authentication, that you might only use for deploying apps through DevOps that no other user is using within Business Central, but yes, you would pay an account for that within Business Central. yeah. So yeah, the idea is that you would use any account, but not have all of them an enabled multi-factor authentication, but some kind of service account, but not a service account, because service to service OAuth is not possible yet in terms of with Business Central. So yeah, kind of like the only thing that I can say about that. That was it. The end of my story. I realize I didn't completely fill 1 hour, but I kind of like expected that. Doesn't need to be all just 1 hour or at 1 hour. Anything what I wanted to say, if there is any topic that you would like us to address, please let us know. You can let us know through that email address on this slide. A few suggestions would be like app signing and whatever I've put on this slide as well. One thing that I'm thinking of is to do some kind of YouTube streaming session, which seems to be very popular these days, to anything DevOps. I mean, just a few of us enthusiasts that comes online and discuss anything that is related with DevOps. Could be deployment, could be release, could be anything special scenario that you would have that we ad hoc try to solve or at least give our opinion on that point. Doesn't have to be anything to do with ALOps. Might be ALOps, obviously, but that's something that is maybe on the agenda as well. If you're interested in that, please let us know. There will be an evaluation after I close the webinar. Please fill it in. That evaluation always gives me the topic for the next webinar. Okay. So anything that is left for me to say is a big thank you for keeping with us on following this webinar. And please, especially in these times, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay inside. Okay. Bye-bye.